Hello everyone. So in today's video class we are going to talk about the scope of macroeconomics. As you all know, in our previous video lecture we learned about scope of microeconomics. So we are going to take the chapter a little bit forward and move on to macroeconomics. After that we are going to study the characteristic features of microeconomics and macroeconomics, and then we are going to compare the two, as in how micro and macro are different from each other. So by the end of this video class you will be able to answer certain question, a direct question which can be asked for 3 marks, for 4 marks. What is the scope of macroeconomics? Or the question like, distinguish between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Or this question is asked in another form, state with reasons whether you agree or disagree with the following statement. And the statement could be, microeconomics and macroeconomics are different from each other. So you'll be able to answer this. And two direct questions, individual questions: what are the characteristic features of microeconomics, or explain the characteristic features of macroeconomics. So after this video lecture you'll be able to answer all these questions. Before that, I would like to share, I purchased this 12th standard economics textbook, the new syllabus. So it is for 65 rupees. So of course you have the PDF with you, but it will be easier for you to mark the answers and learn if you have a textbook. So do buy it from your nearest store. Okay. And one more thing I wanted to tell you, that I've been getting so many messages and calls from students, both arts and commerce. Students are asking me about the notes, about the answers, the exercise part of chapter number 1. Children, be rest assured, you will get your notes on time, you will get your answers on time. Let us complete this chapter slowly and gradually, and then I'll be making a short video wherein I will be discussing only the answers from the exam point of view. Only the exercise part, I'll give you the markings in the video, and all the question answers will be discussed along with the page numbers of the textbook. So be rest assured and do not worry, you will get your answers on time. Alright, so to begin with, the scope of macroeconomics. As you all know, just to recap, macroeconomics is derived from a Greek word makros, which means large and big. When it is large, when it is big, means it is studying the entire economy as a whole, all together. So when it is studying the economy entirely, its scope has to be big, it has to be wide, it has to be large. So there are many things included in the scope of macroeconomics, and not to forget the meaning of the word scope means the subject matter, the content which is included, what all topics are studied under macroeconomics. So in this answer we are going to learn these 4 are the theories: the theory of income and employment, the theory of general price level, the theory of economic growth and development, and finally the theory of distribution. Quickly we are going to cover this up. Income and employment. Now, under macroeconomics, you are going to study the huge variables like income and employment. Now, in a huge economy, you have so many people earning income. From where are they earning the income? What is the national income of the entire country? What is the GDP? All the big aggregate variables related to income you are going to study under the scope of macroeconomics. So income, the national income, the GDP, the GNP, the NDP, all the big variables which are connected to national income, which help you in estimating, in calculating national income, are studied under macroeconomics. Employment, a very important theory. J.M. Keynes, I hope you remember this name. This particular person, I had mentioned it in my previous class also when we were discussing about the scope of microeconomics. J.M. Keynes, after the Great Depression of 1930s, he came up with various models. I hope you remember the sentence of mine in the from the previous video. So here, Professor J.M. Keynes, he tries to explain that why people are unemployed in a particular economy, the causes of unemployment, and what are the various steps that the government can take, that the economy can take to combat these problems of unemployment. There are many various types of unemployment that we study under macroeconomics. Now coming to the theory of general price level. I hope you are aware of what is general price level, the prevailing prices in an economy. Now there are two things under this: inflation and deflation. Two very important words of economics. What is inflation? When the general price level rises, everything starts becoming expensive. That particular thing, that particular phenomenon in economics is known as inflation. You must have observed that years back, let us take for example my example. I remember my mom used to tell me that we would go to a market and we would purchase so many things in just a little amount, in just a little given little amount of money. And she would tell me in 20 to 30 rupees there were huge things coming. The entire groceries you could actually buy out of that money. But now, if we compare current situation, what do we get in the same amount of money? 30 to 40 rupees. What are we getting? Hardly anything. One vegetable you go to buy, you will end up spending your entire 30 to 40 rupees. So the purchasing power of money has reduced. This particular situation, this particular thing where your purchasing power reduces, initially you could buy a lot of things with that same amount of money, but now you are unable to buy because your purchasing power of your money has reduced. This situation is known as inflation. So under macroeconomics, you study about inflation. Also, you study about deflation, whereby the general price level of in an economy reduces. Everything becomes cheap. It is largely available in the market, so people are maybe not buying because there is a lot of supply, or people are buying but they are buying it at a cheaper rate, so it doesn't make any difference. People are not earning more, the profits have reduced. So this condition is also very bad for the economy, and that is why, because it is an aggregate problem, because it is the problem of the entire economy, it is studied under macroeconomics. Moving on to the theories of economic growth and development. I'm sure this is ringing some bells in your mind. If you remember last year, 11th standard, chapter number 1, a huge table towards the end of the chapter whereby you did distinguish between economic growth and economic development. I hope you remember that. The same thing is a given here. How a country can progress, how a country can grow, from where the development can take place, which areas of the economy needs to be taken care of. All that comes under the economic growth and development theories. There are many theories given by many economists. One best example I can give you is the Herod-Dommer model. whereby the two economists, Herod and Dormer, they come up with a model whereby they are studying the growth and development in an economy. So one thing I would like to highlight here, the GDP. I hope you remember this. The GDP is the gross domestic product. It is the indicator of your economy. If the GDP is high, you get to know your economy is growing, it is developing. When your GDP is falling, you get to know that your economy is falling, it is not growing at all. Here, I would just like to share a theory with you. The theory is known as the theory of business cycle. Now, what is this theory of business cycle? Just a little diagram. I'm sorry for the disturbance. Alright. The little diagram goes like this. I hope you are aware this is the y-axis and this is the x-axis. You are plotting time here. Alright. And you're plotting GDP here on the y-axis. Okay. GDP changes over the period of time, and that you're going to plot on the x-axis and y-axis. Okay. Whenever a country is born, like for example India, in 1947, up to 1947, we were known as the British India because we were one of the colonies of Britishers. After that, after gaining independence, we were known as independent India. But before that, we were British India. And not to forget all what had happened during the British Raj in our country. 1947, when we got our independence, there were large problems, huge problems in our economy. Many people poor, many people illiterate, many people unemployed. There were no factories, hardly any industries were there in our country. So at that time, our country was at the bottom of the graph here. Slowly and gradually, when Planning Commission was formed, there were the 5-year plans took place, and slowly our country started progressing. Now here, this type of a growth, when it happens, the graph moves upwards. Alright, so this was the example that I gave you of our country when it started to grow. Now a time comes when every economy grows and reaches a point where it has attained maximum level of development and growth. That point on this graph is known as peak. Alright, this part is known as peak, maximum growth attained. Now, due to certain shocks to the economy, like for example, a war might take place, or for example, a pandemic may strike, like we have now the COVID situation. In this COVID situation, of course, our country has fallen, the GDP of the country has fallen. So certain types of certain shocks are such which leads the GDP to drop down. This particular phase is when your country, your economy is falling. It will reach this part which is known as trough. Alright, this is the deepest part, the lowest a country's GDP could fall. This particular place on the graph leads to depression. The country is so much in trouble that it has entered a phase of depression. The best example I can give you is the 1930, the Great Depression of America. I had mentioned it in my previous video also. That time in America, the depression was so bad that many companies were shut down. Many many huge brands were closed. The people were losing jobs because the firms did not have money to give as a salary to the employees. So this particular phase of an economy is a real bad phase. But after that, there are many economists who come up with solutions. What are we supposed to do? They come up with their models so that the country can grow. Now, this particular phase, when the country is growing again, is known as recovery. Alright, so as all of us know, we fall sick, we go to the doctor, we have our medicine, and then we recover. So that's how this works. The economy is now in the depression phase, and then the economists, who are the doctors of the economy, they come up with their solutions, and then again the economy recovers. Again it reaches a point which is known as peak. So this fluctuation, this cycle is always there. Sometimes the country is in depression, sometimes it is in recession, sometimes it is blooming, it is at its peak. So this particular cycle is known as the trade cycle or the business cycle. This particular cycle is also studied in macroeconomics, and that is why it comes under the scope of macroeconomics. Right? I'll just erase this part. Okay, so now another thing, the last point of the scope that we are going to do is distribution. I hope you remember in the scope of microeconomics, we had done one point wherein we studied the allocation of resources. That allocation of resources was a part of microeconomics. Now this distribution, this theory of distribution is a different thing. Here what are you going to study? Here you are going to study what is national income made up of. How much of national income, this is my entire national income, how much of it is gone as rent, how much of it has gone as interest, how much of it is gone as wages, and how much of the national income is gone as profits. I hope you remember the 4 factors of production. These are nothing but the rewards of the factors of production: the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. So who gets what and how much, that is also considered studied under the scope of macroeconomics. So I'm sure you have understood so far, alright, the scope of macroeconomics. Now we move further to compare or to distinguish between microeconomics and macroeconomics. The reason I have taken these two together is that because it will be easier for you to learn it as a distinguished answer. It will be convenient for you. Okay. The first point, microeconomics versus macroeconomics. The first point, very simple. If you remember the Greek words, the I and the A. I stands for individual and A stands for aggregates. Very simple. You will be able to write the first point very easily because you already know the meaning of the two words. So microeconomics is studying the individual units. It is not studying the entire economy altogether. Instead, it is dividing the entire economy into small bits and pieces. Alright, it is dividing the economy into small parts, and then it is studying each part individually. That is why individual units. Opposite of that, macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is studying the entire economy altogether. You can see here all the big problems, all the big variables of the economy is studied all together under macroeconomics, and that is why the first point states that it is the study of aggregates. Alright, next point, price theory. I'm sure you remember when we did the scope of microeconomics, If you don't remember, please go on to Maharashtra College official YouTube channel. You'll find my video there. Price theory. You remember we talked about that the prices of goods and services and the prices, the rewards for factors of production are studied under microeconomics. How the prices are going to be determined on the basis of demand and supply, that is studied. How the prices are going to be fixed, that is studied in microeconomics, and that is why it is also known as price theory. You may get a question like, give reason. Microeconomics is also known as price theory. So you will write that because it helps in determining the prices of goods and services, and it helps in determining the rewards of factors of production, and that is why it is known as price theory, how the prices are going to be fixed. On the other hand, macroeconomics is known as income theory. We studied here in the scope. It is known as income theory because it is entirely studying the national income, the big aggregate of the economy. It is going to study the national income, it is going to study the GDP, all the big variables that are related to income. It is going to study that, and that is why it is known as income theory. Most of the points are just a basic repetition of the points that we had already done in scope. Alright, next point: partial equilibrium, general equilibrium, assumption ceteris paribus, assumption interdependence. Now these 2 points are connected. Before starting these points, just a little thing I would like to share about economics, of course. Keeping these 2 words in mind, general equilibrium and partial equilibrium, keeping these 2 things in mind, just about to share a little thing about economics. Now, my economics teacher, I remember, used to always say economics is like a chain. You get that? A chain reaction. Why is it a chain reaction? Because each thing leads to something else. Basic example that I can give you: if I am illiterate, I will not be able to get a good job. So because of my illiteracy, I will remain unemployed. Alright, so this caused this. One thing caused another thing. If I am unemployed, I am going to remain poor. Right? This thing, illiteracy caused unemployment, unemployment caused poverty. If I'm poor, my basic needs are not they are not met, I will be not contributing anything to the national income. Once the national income is low, of course the GDP is going to be low and the entire economy is going to fall. Here I am talking about only myself, but if you see the entire economy as a whole, if there is a lot of illiteracy, it will lead to unemployment. If there is a lot of unemployment, of course poverty, and if there is a lot of poverty, as you all know, poverty is a vicious circle. Once you are trapped in poverty, once a country is trapped into poverty, it is very difficult to come out of it. So one problem will lead to another, another will lead to the third problem, and so on and so forth. All the variables, all the big variables of economy are related to each other, are connected to each other just like a chain. One will react, the chain, one thing will react, it will affect the another. The another thing will react and it will affect the third thing. So this is how the economy works. It is like a cycle, it is like a chain. So here it is assumed that because microeconomics is only studying small units, it is only studying the small parts of the economy, it is not studying the entire economy. That is why it is using partial equilibrium, where it is ignoring one thing and concentrating a part only a part. Partial is what? Only a part of it is focused on. That is why it uses partial equilibrium analysis. Okay, general equilibrium analysis is one where all the factors, all the variables are studied together. So here whatever equilibrium is, it is a general equilibrium whereby you are not ignoring. You are only focusing on, for example, demand of one person. But here you are focusing on the demand of every individual. Along with that, you're going to focus upon the supply of every individual and the other factors. Okay, so I hope you're getting this, the basic difference between the two, partial and general. Here, in this particular point, the basic assumption of microeconomics is ceteris paribus. What is ceteris paribus? Very simple. Other things remain constant. This is the meaning of the word ceteris paribus. Other things remain constant. Alright, you can memorize it in such a way if you don't remember. Other things remain constant. Here we are only focusing on one variable of the economy, not the entire economy. So here we are assuming that other things are not changing, they are as it is, only one thing is changing, and that is why we are studying only that one thing. Other things are remaining the same, are remaining constant. For example, in chapter number 3, in chapter number 4, you will be studying the law of demand, the law of supply, where in the beginning of the statement of the law, it is given other things remain constant. Means no other things are changing. The population remains the same. The literacy level remains the same. The habits of the people remain the same. The income of the people remain the same. Only what is changing is price that is changing. So here we are focusing only on price and not on the other factors. That is why it is considered as one of the important assumptions of microeconomics. Opposite of that assumption, interdependence. The assumption of macroeconomics is interdependence. We discussed earlier, just because it is like a chain, everything else depends on everything else. Each thing will cause another thing. Everything is leading to a change which will affect the other thing, and that in turn will affect the another thing. So everything is dependent on each other. This is the assumption of macroeconomics. Why this assumption? Because the entire economy is studied as a whole. Alright, I hope you're following it. Next one, the fifth point, slicing method. Very simple. You can link it with the first point. Because microeconomics is dividing the economy into small parts, it is slicing it up, it is cutting it up. That is why it is studying, it is using slicing method. I hope you remember the tree example that I gave you in the previous class. Microeconomics is studying only a tree, not the entire forest. Which branch studying the entire forest? Macroeconomics, and that is why it will use lumping method. Lump means when you're taking the whole thing together. Macroeconomics is using lumping method because it is studying the entire economy as a whole. Okay, now these 5 points you can take as distinguish between. Okay, when you are asked a question like distinguish between microeconomics and macroeconomics, you can write these 5 points. Of course, not like this. You will have to elaborate it with the help of the textbook and the markings I'm going to give you for sure. So if you write 5 points, it should be more than enough for a 3-mark or a 4-mark answer. Okay, now after this, there are certain points. Even this point you can take up as into your distinguished answer. Microeconomics has a limited scope. You know why? In our previous class, again, we had discussed about it. It has a limited scope because it is not studying the entire economy, it is studying the parts of the economy. That is why it has limited scope. Here you have a wide scope. Macroeconomics is studying all of these big variables, and that is why the scope is wide. It is used by the government officials to plan certain policies. How are we going to start the growth of a country? How are we going to start the development of our economy? The big decisions like demonetization, the big decisions like GST, these all are macro decisions which come under macroeconomics. So that is why the scope of macroeconomics is wide. So you can take these 5 to 6 points in your distinguished answer. Now coming to these 2 points, the remaining, marginalism principle. Microeconomics uses marginalism principle. What is marginalism principle? Marginalism means the utility or the satisfaction you derive from one additional unit of the commodity that you consume. Okay, the definition is of course there in your textbook, chapter number 2. When you study utility, you will study the detail of this particular point, but here just a gist of it is given. Marginalism means the satisfaction or the utility that you get through the consumption of one additional unit. Now let us discuss this with the help of an example. For example, I'm really very thirsty. I haven't had water since long hours. Say for example, I'm fasting. Alright, no water, no food, nothing at all. The level of my thirst is really very high. I'm really very thirsty. Now once I get the permission or I get the access to water, what am I going to do? I'm just going to fill the glass of water and gulp it inside to quench my thirst. Now here, because I was very thirsty, because my thirst was very deep or it was very intense, I couldn't wait for water, and that is why I just gulped it down. The higher the intensity, the higher will be the utility, the higher will be the satisfaction. The more I'm thirsty, the more utility I will get after having that glass of water. So let's say for example, I'm 100% thirsty, and this first glass of water, I'll just erase this part. Say for example, I'm really very thirsty. My thirst is 100%. Okay, and I want to drink water. Once I drink the first glass of water, this first glass of water is satisfying my, for example, 80% of thirst. My 80% of thirst is satisfied, it is quenched. Now I will fill another glass of water, my second glass of water, and I will drink. Will the second glass of water give me the same satisfaction, give me the same utility as the first glass? Of course not, because now at this point, after having the first glass, I'm already satisfied a bit. So the utility will be lesser than the first glass. So in my second glass, say for example, I get a utility of 10%. I will drink another glass, that is my third glass. Here I will get a utility for maybe 5%. So as and when I am increasing the number of glasses, my utility is reducing, because first glass satisfied enough thirst, second glass also satisfied, third glass also satisfied a bit. A point will come wherein I will stop drinking water, thinking that if I drink more, it will lead to dissatisfaction. That point when I realize that I have achieved maximum satisfaction is my point of satiety. After that, if I drink water, it will lead to dissatisfaction. It can cause harm to me. I might fall sick. I might vomit. So this will lead to harm. It will cause harm to me, and that is why it is dissatisfaction. So every unit, this unit gave me 80. This unit gave me 10. this unit gave me 5. When you're studying the utility derived from every additional unit, not all the units together, but every additional unit, that is known as marginalism principle. Microeconomics uses marginalism principle because it is studying one unit at a time. Okay, so I hope you followed. Next point here, growth models. We had discussed here already macroeconomics. One of the feature of macroeconomics is that it studies the growth models. It gives out growth models, how a country can grow, how it can develop, what can lead to increase in GDP, what can lead to increase in national income, how can you solve the problems of the economy, all that. So that becomes one of the important features of macroeconomics, where you focus only on growth and development, and macroeconomics does that. Coming to the next point, market structures. Now you have one chapter in your textbook, the forms of market, wherein you will be studying the different types of market, like for example perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition. All that you're going to study in your in one of the chapters. So microeconomics is helping in studying the different structures of market, different types of market, wherein you are going to get a detailed study of the buyers, the sellers, the quality of products that they are selling. So we study that under microeconomics, and that is why it becomes a scope of microeconomics. The next point here, general price level. Again, we discussed it here. General price level includes two things, inflation and deflation. Inflation, when the prices are high, the things are expensive, the purchasing power of money is less. Deflation is where you have a lot of money, your money can buy everything that you want, you pay less and you get more because things are cheaper. So macroeconomics studies general price level, and that is why it becomes a feature of macroeconomics. So the reason I took these topics together, because they are somewhere related to each other and it will be easier for you to learn. So and finally, yes, we have done this point, limited scope because individual study. It is a wider scope because it is the study of aggregates. So I hope you're finding these answers easy and you'll be able to learn. In my next video lecture, we will be covering up the importance of the two. How is microeconomics important? How is macroeconomics important? And then finally, we'll move towards the exercise, the question answers of this particular chapter. So I hope you are well with this. So see you in my next video, and please share, like, subscribe and forward it to all your friends, both in arts and commerce group, and do take care and see you.